And my camera froze there for a moment. So I'm using a new camera. So interested in the comments. If you let me know if I'm coming through clear. I'll kind of wait for the first comment. We've got time, right? We're at a pandemic, so we've got nothing but time. But I'm using a new camera. I noticed that especially when I copied the videos onto YouTube, the resolution wasn't great. So and I don't like using new things because when you use new things, they sometimes don't work. So if you could in the comments, just I'll wait for the first comment to see if you can see me okay. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My microphone is turned up. Um, and so hi Alicia. Thank you so much. So good. So at least you can see me. Maybe that's not such a great thing. You'll see on movies and stuff they use video filters, right, which can make you look younger and that. And maybe I need to investigate that. Make me look younger and taller, maybe, and less gray in my beard. I've had some friends from high school who have stumbled upon a couple of these videos via Facebook, and one of the comments they've shared is that. Wow, you have a gray beard. And, well, I'm 50, right? I'm 50 years old. What do we expect? I have most of my hair, anyway, for now. We'll see. But before we get into our scripture for today, which is John chapter 7, good morning, Miss Sally. John chapter 7, verses 37 to 39, just a few verses. And as I'll normally do, I'll provide a little bit of context of what those verses are within. But before we get to that, just a few little housekeeping announcements. Starting next week, so Monday, beginning on Monday, the daily streams will be at 1 o'clock as opposed to 11 a.m. at 1 o'clock. And we'll send out notifications ahead of time like we normally do. So beginning next week, all the daily devotions are at 1 o'clock. And mainly that's because the duties at Wellspring in the morning, I find myself having to kind of rush here to do the stream, and I don't want to rush it. I want to put enough thought into it, and so 1 o'clock allows the time in the morning at the nursing facility when I and Randy are there to do that. So, and as we're going, I'm just trying to scroll down to see all the. Hi, Natalie. Good morning. And so our reading for John chapter 7. Let me give you a little bit of the context before we get to the reading and what's going on in the earlier part of the 7th chapter of John. And the theme we're kind of looking at throughout this chapter, one of the recurrent themes throughout all of chapter 7, is this notion of the time had not yet come. The time had not yet come, that Jesus' hour was not at hand, meaning his timing for his ministry, it wasn't time yet. And we see this at the beginning of chapter 7. We read that Jesus was going to avoid the region of Judea because of the threat that was against his life. And we learn that he did go to Judea secretly and not publicly. But his brothers, not his disciples, his brothers, basically said, look, public figures don't do things in secret. You need to go publicly. And Jesus' response in chapter 7, verse 6, is that the right time for me has not yet come yet. So, but what we see is Jesus does go to Jerusalem with the intent of going secretly for the Feast of Tabernacles, and he begins to teach. He goes to the temple and begins to teach, so not so secretly. And he affirms, in his teaching, he affirms his solidarity with God, and then he defends himself against the scribes and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who had been accusing him of doing a work on the Sabbath, in this instance specifically of healing of a man. And that was one of their rules, not from Scripture, but one of the more than 600 extra rules that the Pharisees had come up with about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. So, and then the end, at verse 30, it reads this, at this they tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. So that's the second time we've seen this idea. Earlier in verse 6, when his brothers said, look, you need to go publicly to Jerusalem, and he said, my time has not yet come. And again in verse 30, when the crowds tried to seize him, but they couldn't because his time had not yet come. So that becomes the context for our reading. So we read in John chapter 7, beginning with the 37th verse. On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we have a lot going on. We have a lot going on in these verses. Well, first we read on the last day of the great feast, on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And it helps to get a little context of what the Feast of Tabernacles was all about. It was also the Festival of Booths, or Sukkot, as it's known today. And the Feast of Tabernacles lasted 8 days. And all through the first 7 days of the festival, the high priest would go to the pool of Siloam. He would draw water in a golden pitcher, and then he would pour out that water in a special hole on the altar. And that was for the first 7 days. And it was a reminder to everyone that God had miraculously provided for Israel, for a thirsty Israel in the wilderness. And what's interesting here is that on the 8th day, now when it gets awfully detailed here, but the Feast of Tabernacles, it lasted 7 days in Jerusalem in the city, and then 8 days outside of Jerusalem. So technically it was 7 days, but there was an 8th day. On the 7th day, those who were observing the festival would cease dwelling in their booths or their sukkots or their tabernacles. That was part of what the Festival of Tabernacles was. It was a harvest festival praising God for the olive and the grape, but also a reminder of when they were in the wilderness and God provided for them, specifically water and other things. But on the 8th day, no water was poured. No water would have been poured on the 8th day. And this becomes really the last feast time Jesus would spend in Jerusalem before the Passover. And remember, there were 3 great pilgrimage festivals for Jews: Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Tabernacles that we read about today happened in late September, early October. It was the month of Tishri, right? The 15th day of the month of Tishri in Hebrew. So late September, early October. So it was this harvest festival praising God. And it lasted 8 days. 7 or 8 days, depending on how technically. But it's important because it's on, and it says, we read in 37, on the last day of the feast. Now, some people disagree on whether this was the 7th or the 8th day, but it would make sense that it was the 8th day because that was the day when no water was poured, which lends a whole different element to what Jesus is going to say. That Jesus stood and he cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." So on the final day of the festival, when either the last of the water was poured out or no water was poured out, Jesus stands among them and says, "Whoever's thirsty, let him come to me and drink." So it's significant that Jesus, because of when he said it, during the Feast of Tabernacles, after the last of the water had been poured out on the previous day, and it's important because of where he said it, standing in the temple courts right outside the temple itself. And then what he says, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." And the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, it emphasized how God had provided water to Israel in the wilderness on the way to Canaan. And Jesus stands and he boldly called people to himself to drink and to satisfy their deepest need, which is a spiritual thirst, which I'm convinced that our deepest hunger is not of food or water, but a spiritual hunger, and it always has been. Now, it's interesting as well, the invitation. Listen to the invitation. If anyone thirsts, anyone. The invitation is given to everyone, no matter based upon their intelligence, no matter their race, no matter their class, no matter their nationality, no matter their political party. There was no limit to it. But the invitation was also narrow, and it's to if anyone thirsts. So the invitation is for anyone, but for those who thirst. This, and this has always been a foundation of our Christian faith. Wisdom begins with fear. Forgiveness begins with confession. This idea that we recognize our spiritual thirst. It's there. People can deny it. They can try to fill it with other things, but in your heart of hearts that thirst is there. That need is there. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is where it gets exciting, right? Oh my goodness, Pastor Jim's getting excited about some scripture. Well, it is exciting, because Jesus is going to say, when he's talking about thirst, he's very clear here. He's talking about belief and faith in him, and he uses the metaphor of drinking. To come to Jesus and to drink was to put your faith in him. To trust and to rely and to cling to Jesus both today and in eternity. And this is what's interesting. Jesus isn't just talking about taking this living water in, right? He says, when in verse 37, whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. So the invitation to come to Jesus and drink is given, and then he says, guess what? When you do, living water will pour out of you. And this is where the Greek gets very interesting. It's ek, tes, kolia or kolias, and that's what it gets translated from. And it means from the belly, the belly. And I think that's where the English word colon comes from, kolias, from our innermost being. That those who drink from Christ will have this living water flowing from our innermost being, from our bellies, if you will. And this very fact that this isn't just a blessing received, but it also becomes the source of blessing to others. That when we drink from this living water, that becomes our source of blessing to others. It's a fulfillment of Genesis 12, where Jesus said to Abraham, look, the blessing I give you is going to be for you and your offspring. That not only is the blessing I'm giving you, but that you will be a blessing to others. What a great connection to the Old Testament here as well. And then Jesus makes clear. Now this he said in verse 39 about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus had not yet been glorified. Jesus had been clear, look, I have to go before the Spirit comes. And that's what we're celebrating this Sunday, the Spirit of Pentecost, the birthday of the church, if you will, descending on those first disciples, descending upon all of us, giving us the power of the Spirit of God. And what is that power? Well, it's certainly not an earthly power. It's certainly not a power that's going to make you rich or going to make you good looking or going to make you popular. But I believe the power it speaks of is the power of blessing, that you and I can bless others from the living water that we receive from Christ, from our innermost being, to invite people to come and drink, those who are thirsty. And I think we're all thirsty. Well, the rest of chapter 7 ends with the crowd questioning Jesus. The crowd is wondering what's going on. The Jewish leaders are getting even angrier. And it's interesting because this is where in chapter 50, a guy by the name of Nicodemus pops up again. Nicodemus basically says, look, even our own laws, do we judge someone first without giving them a hearing? So, Nicodemus is even challenging the Jewish leaders. You're not even following your own law. You're trying to condemn this guy. And their response to him is interesting. Are you from Galilee too? That's their response. Galilee, they were all hicks and backwater people, rednecks, right? They weren't the elite, astute, educated people. And so when Nicodemus challenges them that they're not even following their own law, they're saying, what? You're from Galilee too, aren't you? What an ending. Well, my song today, as I was contemplating these verses. It's a simple song, and unfortunately for me, it's a song that when our kids were little, VeggieTales were very popular, and I just remember Larry the Cucumber singing this song. So I try to get that out of my head when I'm singing this song. But the song is called "This Is My Father's World." Just this great song, just affirming, right, that this is God's world and that you and I have a place in it, have a place in it, and our place in it is to glorify and worship Him in all that we say and all that we do. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and round me rings, all music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, His hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear Him pass, He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world, oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world, the battle is not done. Jesus who died shall be satisfied, and earth and heaven be one. This is my Father's world. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Receive the living water and let it flow from you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you join us this Sunday morning for worship as well as for our live stream tomorrow at 11, but then Monday we switch to 1 p.m. So may God bless your day, and thank you for your time.